In a rare appearance, Baltimore Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti sent scalding messages about the team and Lamar Jackson, but in a good way. We talk about what he had to say and so much more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher, Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. That includes video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and audio form where you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're a 5-day-a-week plus more daily Ravens show. So Monday through Friday, we have you covered 5 days a week with an episode, and then on the weekends, sometimes we have bonus episodes that drop. We go live after every single Ravens game, after every single piece of Ravens big news as well. So if you want daily Ravens coverage, be sure to keep it locked in here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Thursday here, rounding out another week. Coming up on the end of it, the draft continues to sneak up on us. We'll get into some more draft talk in the final part of the show because I do want to continue to dive into that as we're getting closer and closer. But we have to talk about the big news of yesterday, which was an interview dropped. Steve Bisciotti, the Ravens owner, very rare appearance from Steve Bisciotti, by the way. He sat down with John Harbaugh, and he got interviewed. Those two did by Garrett Downing of BaltimoreRavens.com. And he sent some very passionate scalding messages about the team, about Lamar Jackson, but he did it in a good way. These are good messages. So we'll talk about it in the first part of the show. Then we'll kind of dive into Baltimore's remaining free agents. I want to talk about, obviously, who they've lost, who they've brought back, but who's still out there on Baltimore's list. Could they bring any of those guys back? And then, of course, draft talk in the final part of the show. Let's dive into it. Steve Bisciotti, again, sits down with Garrett Downing, John Harbaugh, a part of this interview as well, and gave a bunch of different insights. And again, this was a team interview, so it wasn't like Bisciotti sat down with local media and was asked questions from them. So it wasn't fully a whole, he's going to get grilled by all these media people. No, I mean, it was a controlled environment interview, which, again, is still an interview, and we're going to talk about what he had to say. But he sent some very scalding messages, like I've been saying here. First of all, he was asked about John Harbaugh, the extension. John's sitting right next to him, so they both kind of talked about it. But they both really hammered home the message that they value the partnership they have together, the bond that they've built. And there were some great stories in the interview, too. I mean, if you want to listen to it, be sure to do it on the Ravens YouTube page or, on social media where they've posted some clips out. Talk about how they work together, not just the two of them, but Eric Costa, Ozzie Newsome, etc., to be able to find the talent they want, be a cohesive unit together. But when asked about Harbaugh's extension, Steve Bisciotti ended up, again, praising John Harbaugh. He was asked why he felt like why Harbaugh earned a contract extension. Bisciotti said, steady. I think we were doing a lot of the right things. We knew it was going to come. It wasn't like a surprise, I don't think, to either of us. We're happy to have him for 4 more years. That's the long and short of it. Bisciotti was very complimentary of Harbaugh and talked a lot about how this was something that both of them expected. They joked that Harbaugh demanded more money, which, again, he did get a nice little pay raise. Ian Rappaport reporting that the deal is going to be for more than Jim Harbaugh's deal as brother, so north of $16 million per season. The reports about Harbaugh's old deal was right around $12 million per season. If you've heard me talk about the extension, I've talked about it really for the past week, almost nonstop. It was an expected move for me. It doesn't change expectations much. I know Bisciotti said 4 more, having Harbaugh for 4 more years, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that means that, if stuff goes wrong, he will be there for 4 more years. I mean, obviously things can change. Bisciotti can eat money if it doesn't work. But again, this is a coach that for the past 17 years. And they both kind of talked about it, how it's been that long, how they've established that relationship, how both of them understand. And, Bisciotti holding Harbaugh accountable. Bisciotti doesn't like when Harbaugh's unjustly criticized. When he is fairly criticized, Bisciotti has to come to Harbaugh and say, hey, I agree with what these people are saying. You talked about that as well. So there is a specific dynamic that these two have with one another. And they've grown that over the course of these last handful of years. I mean, again, we're coming up on nearly 2 decades of John Harbaugh being the Ravens head coach, just a couple years away from that, which is crazy to say. And, Garrett Downey made the point when asking his questions, like that longevity is very rare in today's game, right? And when Bisciotti says, we're doing a lot of the right things, I think what he means is obviously the consistent success in the regular season, winning those games, having competitive teams each and every single year. And I know the ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl, right? I've been on this show preaching that for the past week when talking about the extension. But I mean, when you sit down and think about it, it makes sense why they did this. Does it mean that Harbaugh stays no matter what? I don't think so. I think that there are ways that Bisciotti does move on from Harbaugh even as soon as after next year. But we have to see how it all plays out, because obviously the goal for the Ravens is to win a Super Bowl, as I said. And Harbaugh, hopefully, will be the guy to lead Lamar Jackson to the promised land there. So we know Bisciotti doesn't like to operate with the lame duck head coach. That was what John Harbaugh was going into the year as. He was going into the final year of that deal. This gives the Ravens the stability to have him in place, but at least I would think still the freedom to move on if it doesn't work out. So again, Bisciotti very complimentary there. Then Bisciotti also, a couple of other interesting points he made throughout. Another one that I want to get to is the fact of Lamar Jackson. They told stories about Joe Flacco, and actually Bisciotti told a very interesting story about how Bisciotti really only wanted Matt Ryan at first in the draft. The 2008 draft was Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco. Obviously, the Falcons took Matt Ryan at 3. The Ravens did some draft board maneuvering and took Joe Flacco. But people were saying, if you remember in that 2008 draft, there was only one first-round quarterback. That was what Bisciotti was saying there. And so Bisciotti said, I don't care about draft assets. Get me the guy, because, he said, we don't have a quarterback. We need a quarterback. And so John Harbaugh, people on the staff came to Bisciotti and said, Flacco and Ryan, you can work with Flacco if Ryan's not the option. And Bisciotti said, all right, I trust you. Let's go see. And obviously it worked out well for Baltimore. Joe brought the Ravens a Super Bowl. Matt Ryan was close, 28-3 with Atlanta, but never got that accomplishment as an NFL player. With Lamar Jackson, Bisciotti and Harbaugh both told the story about how they wanted to kind of keep it confidential. They didn't want people to know that they were interested in Lamar. Harbaugh told a story about how he went out after the Ravens took Hayden Hurst. Before they took Lamar, he went out, was eating an ice cream cone. He came back in the draft room and everybody was buzzing. And Bisciotti made it clear, and this was, a very passionate comment, because there was a perceived risk when you took Lamar Jackson. And, Bisciotti talked about how he didn't really view it that way. He said, quote, I don't even look at it as a risk, really. I don't like that word, because it failed. We failed. It wasn't that Lamar failed. And that, I want to read that again. If it failed, we failed. It wasn't that Lamar failed. That to me is a really important thing that he said, because I think more often than not, and I'm not saying it never happens and that it's always on the organization or always on the player. It's very specific, situation based. But I think that when you talk about building an offense around a guy or building any specific part of a team around a certain player, you have to be 100% confident in that guy. You have to be 100% committed to doing it. And I think that Baltimore gave that environment to Lamar. And Harbaugh and Bisciotti both mentioned how he was asked to work out as a receiver. And, there was all this. The difference between 2008 with Flacco and 2018 with Lamar is that 2008, again, there weren't really any quarterbacks outside of Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco that people thought, these guys can be really good. 2018, there were a lot of guys, and Lamar was the one that fell. It was the 32nd pick, but Bisciotti and Harbaugh and the organization had so much belief in Lamar at that point that he was their guy. And yes, they did take Hayden Hurst, which I guess was a risk at the time, because a team could have swooped in like Baltimore did, and they could have taken Lamar. But the fact that he was willing to take the responsibility if Lamar Jackson didn't work out in Baltimore. I think that speaks to if they weren't committed to Lamar from day one, the answer might have been different. I know Bisciotti's not one to, throw blame around or anything like that. He's someone that, yes, will take blame for stuff. But at the end of the day, it shows that, yeah, they were committed. And if it didn't work, all right, we tried our best. It was okay. But at the end of the day, it was the organization that failed. If they weren't committed, if they were like, it's an experiment, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If Lamar didn't work, they could have just said, oh, yeah, okay, it didn't work. He wasn't for us. But it shows the unwavering commitment that the organization has had to Lamar Jackson. I also think a really exciting thing, and I think this is exciting for me because John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta are both mad about not winning a Super Bowl recently. John Harbaugh was talking about how he feels really proud about what the Ravens have accomplished. He said, quote, I feel proud about the things that we've accomplished, but unfulfilled. All we're really thinking about, and the Steve Bisciotti cut him off and said, is championships. We're pissed. Like, you can see the fire. And it's not just that. It's that Bisciotti wants to win a Super Bowl, not just for Lamar. He mentioned Lamar, but he said, it's not even about Lamar. It's about Ronnie Stanley, all these other guys on the roster. Like, he wants to win it for everybody. Obviously, Lamar Jackson, but it's not just Lamar that Steve Bisciotti is like, we have to win for Lamar. I want to win for Lamar. So that was really cool to have him recognize some of the other guys on the roster there. And talked about as well the big quote that I'm going to, end this off with, because I think it's the one that spoke to me the most. He was asked, Steve Bisciotti was about, what do you envision for the next 30 years of Ravens football? And Steve Bisciotti was kind of like, I don't know. And then he ended up he just said straight up, quote, I want to win now. I don't give a damn about 30 years from now. I really don't. I want to win now. I want to win with these guys. Maybe that shows that the Ravens are going to be aggressive over the next couple of years. Maybe that shows they're going to be aggressive this offseason still. I don't know what that means, but Steve Bisciotti's not looking ahead, right? Steve Bisciotti, yes, you have to have some sense of a future, right? You have to look. It's not just about the present. You have to manage the future as well. That's the job of the front office, the big guns in the organization. But their time is now. Right? Lamar Jackson is now. Steve wants to win with those guys. And that, to me, was a really important message that he sent there at the end of the interview because, yeah, he could have taken the cookie cutter answer of, we're excited. We have a long road ahead of us, and it's going to be really exciting to, continue to watch the longevity of the organization. But no, he just said, I don't want to do all that. I just want to win now. Like, that, to me, was awesome. So this is, again, a very rare appearance by Steve Bisciotti. He doesn't really do these types of things. I mean, sometimes he'll sit down with local media in just smaller settings, or he'll do something like this here or there. But Steve Bisciotti, a very rare appearance, and he was throwing the passion around, scalding messages throughout the entire interview. So really cool to see him and John Harbaugh even just interact with one another. It felt like those two, you sensed like genuine connection and genuine conversation that was going on camera. And that, to me, is you don't get that a lot. And I thought that we saw that with those two. So if you haven't checked it out, be sure to go check it out. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about if Baltimore could bring back any of their remaining free agents. Stay tuned. We got a lot coming up here on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Now, Gametime Picks has curation that makes it easy to find better values for tickets, sports, concerts, comedy, so much more. It's not only sports that Gametime has to offer. They have such a wide array of options. And they have super deals, lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Plus, you have peace of mind when working with Gametime because with seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back, our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday edition of the show. And actually, I guess it is somewhat of a milestone because we are officially 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. Night one, we will see the Ravens have the 27th overall pick. We'll get to draft talk in the final part of the show. But let's continue on the free agency wave here a little bit, talking about that. Obviously, we are about a month into free agency at this point, and there's not a ton the Ravens have done from outside the organization. They obviously, I think their biggest move was bringing back Ronnie Stanley, but you just have guys coming in like DeAndre Hopkins, Chidobe Awuzie, etc. But that doesn't mean that they could potentially even be done bringing back their own guys. Now, just for a little quick rundown of what has already happened throughout the first month of free agency, or right around a month of free agency, Baltimore still has moves that they could potentially make, or guys that they could potentially bring back. So, looking at it right now, the Ravens have made just a couple of moves from outside the organization. Chidobe Awuzie, DeAndre Hopkins, Jake Hummel, Cooper Rush. Those are your four from outside the organization they've brought in. Ben Cleveland, Patrick Ricard, Ronnie Stanley, Tyler Wallace. Those are the four that have been re-signed. You also have guys who have left. Chris Board, Malik Harrison, Josh Jones, Patrick McCary, Steven Sims, Brandon Stevens, and Christian Welch. You have a couple of other guys that, could potentially leave or could potentially come back. And I want to talk about those guys who could come back. Is there anybody else they could bring back? You have Nelson Aguilar, Deontay Hardy, Deontay Johnson, Josh Johnson, Christian Matthew, Brent Urban, and Tre'Davious White as unrestricted free agents. You have Owen Wright as an exclusive rights free agent. And then you have Ardarius Washington, who is a restricted free agent. And the Ravens offered him right of first refusal, which means that any team that signs him to a contract, the Ravens have the right to match that offer. If they don't, Ardarius can leave, and the Ravens get no draft compensation. So it's less expensive than offering him a pick tender where they would get draft compensation if he were to leave. Out of the unrestricted free agents, the only guy I can really see coming back is Tre'Davious White, if we're being honest. And even then, with the addition of Chidobe Awuzie, I'm not sure that they will bring in another vet corner. I think that they definitely could. I know we've talked about guys like Asante Samuel Jr. or Russell Douglas or some of those other options. I feel like Trey White is a pretty safe bet that, hey, if there's one of these guys that comes back, it's probably him. I don't see a fit for Nelson Aguilar anymore. Deontay Hardy didn't really work. Deontay Johnson really didn't work. Josh Johnson, he was great for the couple years he was in Baltimore, but the only reason, or the only way I could see that happening is maybe he's like the practice squad fourth quarterback. But with Cooper Rush coming in, I don't think there was a spot for him on the roster. Christian Matthew, I don't see coming back. Brent Urban, I guess there's a very, very slight chance, especially because Calais Campbell went to the Cardinals instead of coming back to Baltimore. So if they're looking for a veteran, I think you could do worse than Brent Urban coming back. He has had some solid moments in his second stint and third stint with the team. But Trey White just seems like the option to me. Like, that's the one guy out of the unrestricted free agent pool that I could see coming back. And this is a good, I don't even want to call it a problem, but it's a good situation to be in if you're the Ravens. Because, again, out of the guys that they lost, I'm not losing sleep over any of the 7 guys they lost in terms of free agency. Michael Pierce, that's probably their biggest loss of the offseason, in my opinion. And I don't really think it's particularly close. I think they've upgraded their roster from a couple of these guys already. In the draft, they'll have the opportunity to do that a little bit more. But the key to me is Ardarius Washington. You cannot let Ardarius leave the building. And I know that the expectations that Baltimore will bring him back, restricted free agency wise, a team would have to really break the bank with Ardarius to have Baltimore not match that deal. And there's a chance that a team does do that. I mean, you look at his film from last season, the thing with Ardarius is just staying healthy. When he is on the field, man, he's a baller. He is an absolute baller. He was someone that, if you've been listening to me on Locked On Ravens, if you're an everydayer and you were listening to me back a couple years ago during that draft process with Ardarius, you knew that I was all in on Ardarius being a day 2 pick for the Ravens. That's how much I liked him. He fell out of the draft due to his size, and the Ravens picked him up. He was a high priority undrafted free agent. And while he's had trouble staying healthy and establishing a role, he got an opportunity last season, and he made the most of it. And he's a guy that plays much bigger than his size. He's a super physical player. He can find the football. He's everything you want. It would be a disaster if Ardarius left, and honestly, it would put a really big blemish on what in my opinion, has been a pretty successful offseason so far. It's not a flashy one. They haven't made a big move, and I think that they should. But so far, through 1 month, I think it has been very successful for them in terms of not losing too much talent. You bring in a couple of guys that are upgrades. Darius can be a cherry on top, especially, and if it doesn't happen before the draft, especially if they do have a good draft, and Darius is kind of the final piece before a big move or something like that, that to me could be a really solid option for them. So there are options. They could bring back a guy here or a guy there, but I mean, I'm really pinpointing the secondary here with Trey White and Darius Washington. They could also bring back Owen Wright just for a practice squad, situation if he wants to battle out in the training camp, but obviously that's not super high priority either. So I think the Baltimore right now, they're in that offseason I've talked about where the past couple of seasons they have had to deal with a bunch of free agency loss, a bunch of really talented players moving on, a laundry list of free agents. They haven't had that this offseason, which gives them the opportunity to operate from a position of strength, not a deficit. So it's been a good offseason. I'm excited to see how it all unfolds, but the draft is also a very big part of that. Again, 3 weeks away today. So coming up in the final part of the show, we'll do some more draft talk, get to a couple more mock drafts, and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you still on this Thursday. Appreciate everybody again for tuning into the show today, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen of the day as well. Whether you're an everyday or a first-time listener or just somewhere in the middle, thank you for all the support and for tuning in. Tell a friend, tell a family member, because, of course, word of mouth is still very important in spreading the word. We're building up awesome communities here on the show. We got social media. We obviously have our video and audio communities, also subtext as well. We're growing here on Locked On Ravens and really, really, really appreciate everybody who was along for the ride. Draft day, not quite here yet, but it's sneaking up on us. As I've mentioned throughout the show, 3 weeks away today. Q and I, Kaji Ismail, former Ravens receiver, had a very interesting conversation on yesterday's show. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure to check it out. But Q was essentially saying that, yes, the Ravens should, or at least it makes sense for them to kind of trade their assets if they have them, which they do, right? Some teams don't. You're like, oh, well, maybe they should trade up. Maybe they shouldn't. Do they have the assets? The Ravens certainly have the assets. 11 draft picks. If there's a win now guy, Q's point was, well, John Harbaugh says the roster is win now. You have a situation where you're not looking, 5 years ahead. You're not rebuilding right now. This is a Super Bowl roster. You should add a NFL ready caliber player. He referenced Nate Wiggins as his example of this that can give you great production in year one. So it's not like you have your first round pick, for example, maybe an offensive lineman. If he doesn't start, for example, the tackle position with Stanley and Rosengarten, if you take a tackle in the first round, he's sitting for a year. Does that help you at all this season? No, if he's sitting on the bench. So it's an interesting conversation because we also know Baltimore, they like having all those draft picks. They've had crazy rounds, like 6 fourth-round picks a couple of years ago in that 2022 draft. But I agree with Q where I think that if there was a year to trade up, and I'm not saying trade up to like 5 and give up all these future firsts and future seconds and players or whatnot, but you still, I could see him end the draft with 9 picks, 10 picks. I think that's still a lot of picks, but maybe in the first round, if there's a guy that's falling 20, 21, 22, maybe even late teens if you want to get crazy with it, 17, 18, 19, you could move up, get a good deal for a guy that can help you. And it's not just like, oh, you're trading up for a 1-year guy that's only going to help you for 1 year. No, that's not the case. It's a guy that can help you in the future, 10, 12 years. Tyler Booker's a really big example of this at the guard position for Alabama, who obviously didn't have a great combine and isn't the most athletic guard in the world, but I think is going to have a 10 to 12-year incredible NFL career because the guy can just play football. The guy can just play football. So don't overthink it. Baltimore rarely does. With, Kyle Hamilton was an example of overthinking for a lot of teams. I think it's a really solid option for Baltimore to trade up this season. Now, they could also trade back, maneuver. There are a lot of different things they could do. But I am team trade up if there's a guy there and the draft board works in mysterious ways. There will probably be someone there. But the Ravens also don't have themselves pigeonholed in a way where they have to pick at a certain position. We've talked about that a ton here on this show, where They could take an edge. They could take a D lineman. They could take a corner. They could take a safety. They could take an offensive lineman. They could get crazy and take a wide receiver again. I don't know how that would work, but they could do it. They have a lot of options. Best player available works so well for them because they take talent and then figure it all out later. Let's get to a couple of listener/watcher mock drafts. Again, I do mock draft Sundays every single Sunday on social media. You can comment your mock draft down below, and I will try to get to as many as I can on shows throughout the week. Let's start off first with a mock draft from Mark Waitley, who has the Ravens taking Derrick Harmon, defensive tackle from Oregon, at 27, Tate Ratledge in a trade at 68, guard from Georgia, Jared Ivey, edge from Ole Miss at 91, Dorian Strong, corner from Virginia Tech at 108, Dante Thornton, wide receiver from Tennessee at 129, Jalen Reed, Penn State safety at 132, Rondé Gadsden, the second Syracuse tight end at 136, Jack Kaiser, Notre Dame linebacker at 176, Ty Robinson, defensive lineman from Nebraska at 203, Tyler Cooper, guard from Minnesota at 210, Caden Prather, wide receiver from Maryland at 212, and Trevor Etienne, Georgia running back at 243. Harmon is one of the better defensive linemen in this class, in my opinion. Definitely a first-round talent. Could, very maximum place I could see him going is very early second round. Hey, look, last time the Ravens took an Oregon defensive lineman, who was it? It was Haloti Ngata, by the way. That worked out pretty well for him in the first round, so if it's anything like that, it's going to be a great pick. Tate Ratledge is one of my favorite offensive linemen in this class. I think he's a perfect second-round target for them. If the Ravens can trade back and get him, I think that would be a really, really solid move. And then again, you're just rounding out needs here. Edge in the third, Jared Ivey, I think is pretty underrated. You get a couple of guys in the secondary here. Dante Thornton can give you some speed from Tennessee. So I like this draft a lot. 2 wide receivers, I might, maybe change out that look, even though you got the Maryland connection there, I might maybe trade out the second wide receiver for, maybe another, I don't know, could be even another edge guy, but you're building up the trenches while also adding guys to positions of need. I think this is a really solid draft here from Mark. Let's get into one from E-Money, who has the Ravens taking Josh Simmons, Ohio State offensive tackle at 27, Tyleik Williams, defensive tackle from Ohio State at 59, Kyle Kennard, the edge from South Carolina at 91, Jackson Slater, guard from Sacramento State at 129, Howard Cross, the third Notre Dame defensive lineman at 136, Jack Kaiser, Notre Dame linebacker at 176, Zal Frazier, UTSA corner at 183, Melo Dotson, corner from Kansas at 203, Maxon Hook, Toledo safety at 210, Clay Webb, Jacksonville State offensive guard at 212, and at Tyrone Ingram Dawkins, the defensive tackle from Georgia at 243. Josh Simmons, again, coming off of a serious injury, would probably be a top 15, maybe even top 10 pick had that not happened. You could maybe kick him inside to guard. This is what I was talking. I wanted to bring this up. This is exactly what I was talking about with, if Simmons is your offensive tackle of the future, could you kick him in the guard until Stanley's gone, then kick him back out to tackle once Stanley leaves or retires or whatnot? That could be an option if the Ravens feel like he can play inside. So really intriguing option there. And then, hey, you double up on the Ohio State trenches with Tyleik Williams, who I think is a really solid. There are so many good defensive linemen in this class. There are like 15 different defensive linemen I'd be totally okay with the Ravens taking at any spot. Like, you're going to get guys in the fourth round that should have been second round picks in last year's class, guys in the second round who should have been first round. Like, it's that deep of a class. And first 5 picks here from E-Money are all in the trenches, which again, build it up. Plus, I think the reason why this is in, I would probably say sprinkle in a corner maybe, or a safety, a secondary guy, but I love the Zal Frazier pick, and I love the Melo Dotson pick back-to-back. Those are 2 of my favorite mid to late round corners in this class. I have a couple of them. Those are 2 of them. That makes it all like, okay, you can splurge on the trenches, where then if you get 2 quality corners like that, look, it's Marlon, it's Nate Wiggins, it's Chidobe Awuzie. You don't need those corners to contribute immediately now, although, hey, you know what? If you go and get a guy earlier, I'm not complaining. The trenches, it starts up front for an offense and for a defense. I like this a lot here from E-Money. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. On the way, hit the like and subscribe button in video form. Follow along in audio form for 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week, talking Ravens football. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.